Good morning, everybody. My name is Leanne Sullivan-Crowley, and I'm the Vice President for Human Resources here at Princeton, and I want to welcome you to this important event. We have brought here to campus Melissa Stockwell. I know that we're all very interested in hearing her story, and I'd like to bring up Sandra Tango, who will introduce her.
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sandra Tango, and I work here in the Office of Human Resources. I also lead the Military Service and Veterans ERG, which is our employee resource group. We're also co-sponsoring this with the Disability Allies ERG. So I'll give a plug to our great ecosystem of employee resource groups that we have. We currently have 10. If you'd like to find out more information, feel free to reach out to me. My colleague Yvette Martinez, who kind of coordinates them, is also here as well. They have sign-up sheets outside at the reception, so I certainly encourage you to get involved. Just a little bit of our format following Melissa's presentation. We'll open up the floor to questions. We'll just ask that you wait for the mic runners just to make sure that everyone can hear your question. And if you could state your name and your department and/or affiliation. Immediately following the presentation, if your schedule permits, we'll have a light reception right outside at the Brush Gallery where you can meet Melissa. She'll also be available to take pictures with you until about 11 o'clock. She does have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. So I want to give you a quick overview of our guest speaker. So in 2002, Melissa graduated from the University of Colorado, and she was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. In March 2004, she deployed to Baghdad, Iraq. Just 3 weeks later, a blast from a roadside bomb struck Melissa's Humvee, causing the loss of her left leg above the knee. After numerous infections and surgeries, Melissa was medically retired from the Army. She is the first female soldier to ever lose a limb in active combat and has been awarded both the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Following her accident, sport became the road to recovery for Melissa. In April of 2008, she became the first Iraqi war veteran to qualify for the Beijing Paralympics. She competed in 3 swimming events, and she was honored by her fellow Team USA athletes to be selected to carry the flag during the closing ceremony. After Beijing, Melissa turned to the sport of para-triathlon, I guess because swimming wasn't challenging enough. She figured she'd throw in cycling and running as well, and she's now a 3-time world champion. She was named USA Triathlon's Female Para-Triathlete of the Year for 2 consecutive years and was twice nominated for the ESPY Award. On September 12, 2016, at the Paralympic Games in Rio, she raced in honor of her fellow soldiers and their families who had given the ultimate sacrifice, serving and protecting their country. And after a grueling race, at the end of the day, she was crowned the new Paralympic bronze medalist, and the USA actually swept that category that year. So please welcome me and join me, Melissa.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can everybody hear me okay up there? Yes. All right. Well, thanks for having me. I've never been to Princeton. I'm driving through campus this morning. It's a beautiful fall, chilly morning, but we're alive and wouldn't really have it any other way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story this morning. And you just heard parts of it, but I'm going to kind of fill in the details. And as I do that, I hope that you can listen to my story and any sort of inspiration and knowledge that I provide. I hope that you can apply it to your own lives, whether it's your personal lives, your career, whether it's realizing how much ability can be in a disability. And the goal is that when we all walk out of here this morning, that we're all greater than the great people we already are. So my story, at least the most dramatic part of it, was about 13 and a half years ago. I was newly arrived in country in Iraq. And like everything in life, it happened so quickly. The combination of a convoy, of a roadside bomb, and of a lot of blood, which was my own blood, resulted in the loss of my left leg above the knee, as you see here. But while there are some tragic moments, my story is not a tragic one. My story is actually one of tragedy turned into triumph. And it's an example that we all have the power to choose our own path in life, whatever obstacles come our way. So my real story actually started in a gymnastics gym. I'm sure a lot of you were young. When you were younger, you were athletes. Maybe you still are. And like myself, I'm sure a lot of you would go and you do your sport and you had these dreams of becoming an Olympian and making it to the world's biggest stage. And like you, I was no different. And I would go to gymnastics before school, after school. I wanted to be that Olympian. And every gymnastics meet, I would stand on that floor mat, my hand on my heart, and I would imagine myself hitting that perfect 10 in that American flag, which was pretty much every young gymnast's dream. And while that never happened, what did happen was developing a deep love for the red, the white, and the blue, for the flag, realizing at a young age how lucky we all were to live in the country that we do. And as I grew older, I would see military personnel walking around the community or on TV, and I would see a flag patch on their shoulder, and I wanted to be part of that. So when anybody asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said I wanted to be in the Army. Now, my story eventually led me out to the University of Colorado in Boulder. And freshman year, I was walking around campus, and I saw the ROTC cadets marching around, and I could just tell how much of a team they were, that camaraderie. So sophomore year, I pretty much marched into my recruiter's office, probably a recruiter's dream. I basically marched in and said, where do I sign? I signed up for the Army. He handed me my first BDU uniform. I went back to my dorm room. I put that uniform on, and I just knew that that's where I was supposed to be. The pride I felt with that uniform on. Now, I don't come from a military family. My parents knew of my desire to be in the Army, but they always thought it was a phase I was passing through, because why would their youngest daughter ever want to be in the Army? So imagine their surprise when sophomore year they get a phone call, and I'm like, guess what, Mom and Dad? I just joined ROTC. There's kind of this awkward pause, and suddenly my dad blurts out, they allow girls in the Army? So it was this very unknown world that we were all diving into together, but of course they allow girls in the Army, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with ROTC. I fell in love with the leadership I was learning, my fellow cadets, that camaraderie. I was able to paint my face in camo. I was able to roll around in the woods. I was able to, learn these battle drills, and I was able to feel like I was something bigger than myself. And then senior year in college, a day that truly changed the world, and one that we'll never forget, September 11th. And if you can recall, it was a Tuesday. And like every Tuesday, it was ROTC day. I was in my BDU uniform. And I was sitting in a classroom with my fellow cadets watching the news unfold on TV. And it was this day that our instructor looked at us and he said, today, your lives are going to change. It's not a matter of if you'll deploy to a foreign country. It's a matter of when. So the uniform that I was so proud to wear on American soil, I knew I'd be wearing on foreign soil as well. But first, a few months later, I was proudly commissioned as a second lieutenant into the United States Army with my once skeptical parents, now proudly by my side. And I set off to what was going to be at least 4 years of active duty in the military, but maybe more. But as what can happen, fate had a different plan. The fateful day of April 13th, 2004, it started out just like any other day. We woke up early. I had our briefing. I got into a vehicle, into my Humvee, which at the time it had no doors, it had no armor. It was early on in the war, and it didn't matter what equipment we had a mission to do, and we were going to do it regardless of what we had. And this day was actually supposed to be kind of a fun day, because if there was any cool place to go in Iraq, it was the Green Zone, because you had Saddam Hussein's palaces, you had the cross sabers, and I actually had my camera on my flak vest, on my bulletproof vest, to take the camera out and take some pictures if the moment arose. But as many of you know, things don't go as planned. And we left the gate, and about 10 minutes into the ride, we went under this underpass, under this bridge, and you're taught to swerve as you go under the bridge in case someone were to drop something from above. We went under it, and this deafening boom, the loudest sound you've ever heard. And I looked up, and the windshield was cracked. And our vehicle swerved to the left. We ricocheted off of a guardrail. We swerved back to the right, and we ended up crashing into this Iraqi woman's house. The woman in the front was calling out, IED, IED. We've hit an IED, which we all knew meant that we had been hit by a roadside bomb. And as we crashed into this woman's house, and we sat there for a few seconds, everyone in the vehicle, all of the other 4 soldiers, executed what they were supposed to do perfectly. We had gone through situations like this in training, and they got out of the vehicle, they surrounded it, they pointed their weapons out to really assess the situation and to see what was going to happen next. So I started to do the same. I reached over, took my seatbelt off, I looked over, and I knew something wasn't right. There was a lot of blood. So I called out, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. And lucky for me, there was a combat medic who was 2 vehicles back. He heard me calling out. He was trained in field first aid. He ran up, he pulled me out of the vehicle by my bulletproof vest, and he laid me there, to which I thought at the time was administering first aid. I know now that he was saving my life. My leg was gone, it had been severed, and I was losing a lot of blood. But as I laid there on my back, I never imagined my leg was gone. I couldn't see what was going on. In my mind, I tried to move my foot or move my knee, and I thought I was doing it, but I know now it's called phantom pain or phantom sensation, where you think you have something, but you no longer do. And I just couldn't comprehend why there was so much commotion going on. And it wasn't until the medic put the tourniquet on, where number 1, the real pain started. But number 2, we all knew that when a tourniquet went on, that whatever was below that was really no longer. So I realized that it probably wasn't as good as I thought it was. And then seeing this picture a few days later, realizing that that was my blood, that was this Gatorade bottle that I was so transfixed on, and a picture that was once hard to look at. But now, over 13 years later, I'm able to look at this picture and really see how far I've come. But it was crazy to think that from that moment, just 1 year earlier, I was at my very first duty assignment at Fort Hood, Texas, as part of the 1st Cavalry Division. I was 23 years old. I was a brand new 2nd lieutenant, a little butter bar, as was endearing term. And I was put in charge of, millions of dollars worth of equipment, of soldiers that were older than I was. A challenging time, but one that I was excited to take on this challenge. And then a few months later, orders coming down that the 1st Cavalry Division was going to deploy over to Iraq in 2004. So I knew my time was going to come, and it had. So in March of 2004, I boarded a plane with, thousands of my best friends, my bulletproof vest on, Kevlar on, weapon in hand. And this surreal flight where you take off and you don't actually think you're going over to Iraq, but you think you're going to just land back home in the safety of the U.S. But landing in Kuwait and stepping off the plane and feeling the heat hit you and the weight of your equipment, and then driving through, the barren desert landscape. I know that there are some out here who have been deployed as well, and it probably looks familiar. It's this barren landscape, and you look across and you see, a few huts over there, and you realize that those are people's homes and just the difference in the way of life. And being in Kuwait for 3 weeks and then making the long trek, the long convoy from Kuwait up into Iraq, up into Baghdad, and crossing that line from Kuwait to Iraq, and your heart starts to beat a little bit faster. Getting to the bustling city of Baghdad, where it's just so many people and vehicles and just so much commotion, and you have no idea, do they want you there, do they not want you there, and just really what your day-to-day life is going to be. And then eventually getting to the town of Taji, which was just north of Baghdad, which is where I was supposed to be for the next year, and settling in, trying to figure out your day-to-day routine and your new normal. Now, I had 2 main jobs over in Iraq. The first was my favorite, because I got to be a platoon leader to 20 of the finest men and women that I've ever known. A lot of them 18 years old, just out of high school, trying to find their way in the world. And they found themselves with me as their leader in this faraway land. But you become family. That camaraderie truly stronger than ever. My other job was a convoy commander, So leading a whole bunch of vehicles from one point to the next, delivering various supplies. I'd be in charge of the soldiers, the convoy, the routes, kind of making sure everything happened as it should. So we had been in Iraq for only 3 short weeks. But I was a proud soldier. I was leading soldiers. I was carrying out missions. You just never think that a roadside bomb is going to come into your life, because you always think that something like that will happen to somebody else. But this time, it was me. And I was lifted, like out of a movie. From the sands of Iraq, I was put in the back of this big 5-ton, basically pickup truck. And I was driven to the nearest aid station, where I was put on a helicopter and I was flown, coincidentally enough, to the green zone. So I got there, just not quite like I'd planned on it. I was taken off of the helicopter. I was wheeled in. I still had a T on my forehead that stood for tourniquet. So if anybody found me, they knew that I was severely injured. I was rushed into a life-saving surgery. I was in an American hospital. They yelled out, "We're in an American hospital, you're safe." Those were the last words I heard before I was wheeled into this surgery. And it wasn't until I woke up and I looked to the gentleman next to me and I said, "I think something happened to my leg." I still had no idea that it was gone. And that's when he told me, "You don't have it anymore. Your leg is gone." And then he handed me a phone and he said, "Would you like to call your parents?" And being a mother now, I can't imagine the horror of a phone call that your youngest daughter has been severely wounded in a war. And looking back, 13 years, I realized that this day is really the day that my real life journey began. I had gone 24 years with both of my legs. Suddenly I was missing one. And I had to figure out how to manage my life from there. But from Iraq, I was flown on this big transport cargo plane where we were stacked 3 high, and I was flown to Landstuhl, Germany, which is where all the soldiers went before making the long trip back to the US. And it just happened that my sister lived in Slovakia. My dad was on business in Vienna. So the day after this life-changing injury, I got to see 2 of my immediate family members rush into my hospital room. Talk about starting things off on the right foot, literally the right foot. Okay, good. That was supposed to be funny. And then eventually going from Germany and ending up at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, which again at the time is where all the severely wounded soldiers went from Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was here where my mom met me, seeing me in and out of too many surgeries. But my parents, once skeptical, but now strong and steadfast by my side, there for me, whatever were to happen. And if any of you have ever been to Walter Reed, you know that it's a very powerful place. And when I was able to kind of come to and look around, I looked around and I saw soldiers missing 2, 3, 4 limbs. They lost their eyesight. They had traumatic brain injuries. And I looked at myself and I thought, holy cow, am I lucky? 1 leg, that was it. I had 3 good limbs. I had my mind, I had my eyesight. Not to mention I had my life, because too many had given the ultimate sacrifice. And I made a promise then to live my life for those that gave that ultimate sacrifice. And while I did receive a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, what made my time most memorable at Walter Reed were the doctors and the nurses. It was my family and friends who dropped everything they were doing to come to my bedside. But of course, it was challenging. I would lay there, I wondered, would I walk again? Would I run? Would I be independent? But luckily at Walter Reed, they do everything they can to help you pass the time, to help you pass these hours of uncertainty. And there was all these, every day we had celebrities, we had high-ranking political officers, we had, dignitaries come to the hospital and visit with us. And it was kind of something fun that you would do, where every morning you'd wake up and the nurse would say, "Guess who's coming today?" And, to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. So I'd like to share my 2 favorites because they obviously stood out to me. So one morning, I wake up and the nurse is like, "Guess who's coming today?" And I'm like, "Who?" She's like, "Oh, Tom Hanks." And a few hours later, Tom Hanks walks in the room and sits down. We have this, he's very genuine and, great guy. And then a few weeks later, the Osbournes walk in. Now, I don't really know Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne, but Sharon sits on the bed and Ozzy kind of wanders around. It ends up like there's a stack of 10 chairs. He tries to sit on them, and the picture is a little blurry, kind of like they are, but it was a moment that I will never forget, and I am forever grateful to everyone that took the time to come and to visit and to show us that we were thought of. I also learned at Walter Reed that it's okay to celebrate the loss of a leg, which sounds a little bit silly, but if you've met any other soldiers who have lost limbs, a lot of them, every year on the day that they lost their limb, they have what's called their Alive Day. So instead of mourning what they've lost, they celebrate being alive. So I thought that was a genius idea, and I actually termed what was left of my left leg, Little Leg. And I decided that every year we were going to have a birthday for Little Leg. That is my leg with a hat on it that says life is good. And that we are going to celebrate life. Because I think we get so caught up in the day-to-day little things in our lives. But if you take a step back, take a deep breath, we're all so lucky to live the life that we do. But what was the most exciting was actually getting up out of my hospital bed, going down to physical therapy, and starting to regain the strength I had lost. And then getting fit for a prosthetic leg in a series of measurements and casting and a process that you never think you're going to have to go through. And then getting handed this piece of plastic and metal, and they say, you're going to walk with this. And you're like, what? Like, how am I going to walk with this thing? But being put in the parallel bars and looking across the room and seeing a gentleman missing both of his legs and an arm, and he's walking. So there's no excuse. Perspective. So then you walk in the parallel bars, start with crutches and a cane, and then the day comes where I knew I was going to be independent. My life was going to go on. Talk about an exciting day. But I knew after I could walk, I always wanted more. I was an athlete when I was younger, and I wanted to live that life of sport again. I knew I wouldn't really be myself until I did. So as exciting as this was, what's even more exciting is what I like to call the start of Melissa Stockwell 2.0. Now, there's all these organizations whose mission is literally to come into the hospital and get us out of our rooms and doing things that we never thought we'd do with two legs, much less with one. So before I knew it, I was at the New York City Marathon in 2004 on a bike that you pedal with your arms, 26.2 miles, a distance I never imagined I would do. And then a few months later, out in Colorado, learning to ski on one leg. I had grown up skiing with two, so on that bunny hill at first, you have little poles that have little skis on the end of them, wobbly, trying to figure out what you're doing. But by the end of the week, all the way up that mountain, flying down that hill, the wind in your hair, trying not to be reckless, maybe a little bit, but going back to Walter Reed and saying, if I can do that, then I can do anything. And it came at a pretty great time because somebody came to Walter Reed to put on a presentation about the U.S. Paralympics. And I sat in a room, kind of like you guys are, and I listened to somebody tell me that if I dedicated myself to a sport, if I trained hard enough and believed in myself, that I could compete in the U.S. Paralympics, which is basically the Olympics for somebody with a physical disability. So it was almost like I had a second chance. I dreamed of the Olympics as a gymnast, and here I was without a leg, but I could still represent my country. I could still go compete on the world's biggest athletic stage. In 2004, I knew that there was a 2008 Paralympic Games, and somehow, some way, I wanted to get there. But first, I was medically retired, and I moved from Walter Reed, from the DC area, back up to Minnesota, where I went back to school. This time in the field of prosthetics, a field I didn't even know existed until I needed a leg for myself. But going back to school to learn how to fit other amputees and just the reward of showing others what they're capable of. But this dream of being a Paralympian was always forefront. And I decided I was going to give it a shot in the sport of swimming. Swimming, I didn't have to wear a prosthetic leg. I could use my crutches. I could get some laps in the pool. And if any of you are swimmers, you understand what I say when the pool just made me feel whole again. Not to mention, I randomly love the smell of chlorine, which is very random. But it all worked together. But just like when I was younger, I went to the pool before school, after school. My times were here. They needed to come down. I needed to be faster and faster. And when I graduated school, I actually moved out to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, put everything else on hold to try to make this dream a reality. The Paralympics is not like the military where you sign up. You have to beat your competitors. You have to make certain times. And almost 4 years to the day after losing my leg, there was a Paralympic trials. And I went into this meet a total long shot to make the team. I had to perform at this meet in order to make it to Beijing in 2008. And I learned a pretty cool lesson in that hard work pays off. A total long shot to make the team, but I broke American records I didn't even know existed. I was so far from them. Took 20 seconds off a 400-meter freestyle. And at the end of that meet, when they named the Paralympic team and my name was on it, this whole journey from Baghdad, and now I was going to go to Beijing, it all came full circle, and to me, it made sense. So the next stop was Beijing. I was going to be a Paralympian. And if any of you watched the 2008 Olympic Games, you might recall seeing Michael Phelps win 8 gold medals in this water cube that they built specifically for the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. So I got to watch him do that on TV, and then a few weeks later, I found myself standing in that water cube with my coach, imagining myself taking another 20 seconds off, because that was realistic, and standing on the podium, because what greater honor would that be? And I swam in 3 events, some freestyle, some butterfly, and I wish I could tell you that I was on the podium. But I walked out to each one of these events, and I looked up in the stands, and I saw a flag that said Little Leg Fan Club. So I knew, regardless of what happened, that my family and friends were there. But I didn't make finals. I didn't even have best times. At the end of the meet, I got a participation medal, which I wanted to chuck out the window at the time, because I thought I came all this way, and that was all I got. I really felt like I had let everybody down. My family, my friends, my teammates, my country. I just felt I could have done better for them. But I learned a pretty great lesson, because at the end of the Paralympic Games, there's a closing ceremonies, and somebody is nominated to carry the American flag into those ceremonies and to represent the U.S. delegation, typically reserved for someone who's done well athletically, who has those gold medals. But when my teammates nominated me to do that, I realized that we all want the medals, we want the recognition, but it's not about the medals. It's about the journey. It's about overcoming obstacles that come your way that you never expect. It's about having the heart and the perseverance to get through them. And being able to carry an object, this American flag that I was so passionate about, into a sold-out stadium representing the U.S. delegation. I think in life we all have moments that you wish you could kind of go back and relive over and over again. And for me, this was one of them. So what's next? How do you beat that? How do you beat competing in the Paralympic Games? How do you beat carrying the flag in? Well, I did what most people would do, is I moved back home to Chicago, and I went back to work. Field of prosthetics, again, realizing how rewarding it was to get these other amputees literally back up on their feet. But I knew I wasn't done with athletics. If any of you are athletes out there, you know once an athlete, always an athlete. So in 2009, I was invited to do a triathlon, so swim, bike, and run, which I used to think was for crazy people. I mean, who wants to do all that in the same day? But this group called the Challenge Athletes Foundation, based out of San Diego, they invited me to do their annual triathlon. And I thought, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I went out there and I swam, I biked, I ran, I crossed that finish line, and I was hooked. The challenge of all 3 sports, being on the same course as an able-bodied athlete, crossing that same finish line. In transition, where is the spot where you come back to between the swim, the bike, and the run. You know, everyone has their biking shoe or their running shoe, and I had my biking leg and my running leg, and, you know, you're trying to get your legs on and off, and they're flying everywhere, and, you know, I just loved the challenge of it. And it turns out I wasn't so bad at it. And for the next many years, I was able to compete on the national and the world stage and at various world championships. And my first world championship was in 2010, Budapest, Hungary, and the date just happened to be September 11th. So wearing this USA uniform, waking up, this is my first world championship, Swimming, biking, running, getting to the finish line, knowing that I was in first, being handed an American flag and being able to cross that finish line in first and to get on that podium and to hear that national anthem. And then the next year, back in Beijing for my second World Championship, where I got to redeem my performance from the Paralympics and to be on top of that podium. And then again in New Zealand. And let me tell you that standing on the podium, that never gets old. And then in 2013, I was comfortable with the physical challenge, but I wanted the mental challenge. So signing up for an Ironman, which truly is for those that are a little bit nuts. You have 140.6 miles to complete in 17 hours. It's a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike, and then a marathon, a 26.2-mile run at the end. And you pay to do this. And it's not about winning the race, but it's about finishing the race. And this day, you start when it's dark, you're in that water, and swimming, biking, and running, and getting to mile 20 of that marathon, and wondering, number one, what on earth I was doing there. But number two, having to remind myself why I was. And the answer of why I was doing this is because I could. So many people don't have the opportunity to run, and I still did. So I was running for them. And being able to put one foot in front of the other, slowly make my way towards that finish line. And then getting there and hearing the roar of the crowd with that American flag, feeling like I was floating towards the finish, and then hearing that I was an Ironman, and realizing that we all have so much potential, and we don't give ourselves enough credit. And if we only try something, it's amazing what the human body is capable of. So, it's been over 13 years since I lost my leg. And I'm a very proud American. I'm a proud above-the-knee amputee, and I really show my leg off wherever I go. And true to my word, every April 13th, we celebrate Little Leg's life. Family and friends fly in. It's become quite the event where people come in. There's a lot of dancing. There's party favors. There's cakes. We may or may not drink out of my leg, but that's for those that come to find out. But it's truly a celebration. But it's also a day of reflection. And when I look back on the past 13 years, I've had some pretty incredible moments. Been able to share a dance and ride a mountain bike with George W. Bush on his ranch in Texas. I even got a presidential kiss when I presented him with an American flag that flew over the Olympic Village in Beijing. Been able to share my story with Katie Couric and her viewers. Who doesn't dream about a fist bump with Tom Brokaw? I've been able to stand in a room with, at the time, were all five living presidents and their spouses on a day that was the most historic day that I've ever been a part of, wondering why I was there. But the honor of being asked to say the Pledge of Allegiance at the opening of George Bush's library in Texas. And saying the Pledge of Allegiance and going home this night on a day that wasn't about politics as so much as these days, but a day that brought all sides together and just honoring America. And going home that night just so proud to be an American. I've been able to share a laugh with Michelle Obama. Was able to ride my bike around DC with Barack Obama. And then most recently, some of you may have seen this book called Portraits of Courage. It's a book that George Bush has painted. He has painted over 60 wounded veterans. And the honor of not only being in his book, but having the painting of the dance that we shared. A moment that to me meant so much, but now having this memorialized. And if you haven't checked out the book, I urge you to, because all proceeds go towards veterans like myself reintegrating back into the civilian life. But as cool as all these moments are, what I'm most proud of is really giving back. Because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for so many people and organizations that helped me out along the way. So back in Chicago, co-founding what's called Dare to Try. It's a para-triathlon club, and we get athletes with physical disabilities into the sport of triathlon. And you take someone like an 8-year-old Amanda who's missing her leg like I am, She gets bullied at school because kids can be tough. But we find her. We give her the resources, the adaptive equipment needed to do a triathlon. She swims, she bikes, she runs, she gets a medal. She goes to school the next day and shows off her medal, and suddenly she's the school hero because she's a triathlete. It adds self-confidence, it adds self-worth, and it truly is one of my most professional accomplishments. And then, of course, on the personal side, my family, my husband, Brian, my son, Dallas, who will be 3 in November, and the newest addition is Millie, who's a young 3 months, and this additional motivation of being a parent, of waking up every morning and wanting to live my life so my kids will be proud of me, wanting to dream big so my kids see me dream big, and I hope that they will have big dreams of their own someday. So it's been a pretty cool ride, and I've learned a lot along the way. I've learned that life is short, and some of you probably know that more than others. For all you ladies out there, I've learned that toenail polish not only goes on a plastic prosthetic foot, it also comes off. Very important detail for a 23-year-old woman. And as cheesy as it sounds, I've learned that dreams come true. Because mine did last September when I got to qualify to compete in the Rio Paralympic Games in the sport of triathlon. And this race could have been on any day, but it was September 11th. And I was on the world's biggest athletic stage wearing a USA uniform. And I woke up this morning of September 11th knowing that my race was not about myself. It was about those who had given that ultimate sacrifice. And every swim stroke, every bike pedal, every run step was for them. So to swim, bike, and run up and down the streets of Copacabana Beach in Rio, to come across the finish line in 3rd, getting a bronze medal that felt like my personal gold. Standing on a podium as part of a USA sweep, where I got to stand up, we got to see not 1, but 3 American flags go up as we heard our national anthem. And I got to stand on that podium and I got to think about myself, how 13 years ago, somebody had tried to take my life, but they didn't. They took my leg, but they didn't take my spirit. And next to me was my friend Haley, who lost her leg to cancer, but she didn't let that stop her. And just showing the world how much ability was in a disability. And this time, being able to give my dad and my husband hugs with tears of joy, just so proud to be there and to be in that moment. And then the best part about it was going home to my son, putting the medal around his neck, and the culmination of the hashtag Mommy Road to Rio. And yes, my son was not in Rio with us. We had jumbo-sized heads made of him to bob around the race course for that extra motivation. So in conclusion, I want to share with you a few things that I've learned. Again, with the goal of all of us leaving here today, thinking about our own life and being greater than the great people we are. First off, things never go as planned. We all know that. We had these dreams when we were younger. You know, you want this job, you want to be married by this time, this many kids, the fence, the dog. It don't happen that way. There are twists, there are turns, there are obstacles in life. But we all have the power to overcome those obstacles. You can get through them, and a lot of times you end up even better on the other side. But to do that, you have to believe in yourself. And you should believe in yourself even when you doubt yourself. We all have temporary setbacks that come up, but don't let that swallow up any positive attributes that you've developed. Teams, you guys are a team, whether you know it or not. Look around. Your teammates are your coworkers, they're your family. When I look back at the teams that got me here today, I am in awe. Starting from my platoon, my nurses and doctors, Team USA. Find people that you trust in. Find people to rely on, because we're all in this life together. And lastly, if you start each day with a positive outlook, it might be your best day yet. The glass can always be half empty, but it can always be half full. We all have difficulties that come our way in life, but there is a silver lining around them, I promise you. Find a way to make your difficulties desirable. So I've just told you my story, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the things that I've done, and that I hope to continue to do. And I hope that if any of you were to come up and to tell me your story, that you'd be proud of it as well. And if you're not, the time to make a change is not next week. It's not tomorrow, but it's today. We have the ability to choose our own paths in life. That's the beauty of it. So choose the path that you want your life to take. My story, well, I hope to continue on with the athletics, hopefully eyeing towards Tokyo 2020. But if you want to follow along to Melissa Stockwell 3.0, I promise you that there's never a dull moment. Thank you. Thank you. What I didn't mention is I know obviously there's veterans and currently serving in the room. Thank you for your service. I meant to say at the beginning. So from one veteran to the next, thank you guys. Thank you.
So before we open up to questions, I just wanted to leave Melissa with a little gift. So you may have seen a lot of orange and black on campus. So we're not actually preparing for Halloween. This is kind of our year-round colors.
Sure.
It's just now finally seasonally appropriate. But we wanted to give you some swag here.
All right, thank you.
Given your bravery and courage and your inspiring story, you're certainly an honorary Princeton Tiger today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So if you'd like to ask a question, we have a couple of mic runners on either side of the room. And again, please wait for the mic and state your name and department or affiliation.
Good morning, Melissa, and thanks for coming. Your story was really inspiring. And I'm sitting here thinking, this woman is fearless. And I just wanted to ask you, is there anything that scares you? And if there is, how do you deal with that fear? And if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear in the world, right? And as a parent, I think my fear is I want my kids to grow up. I want them to grow up kind. I want them to grow up, being thankful to live in the world that we do. So I think the majority of my fear these days comes of how am I parenting my children correctly. But I think, there's little things that it's all relative, right? I mean, there's something I could be nervous or scared about something, and someone else it could be totally different. So I think when those moments do come your way, you have to figure out a way to, you find something positive about it. There's so many tragic things that go on in the world, these days, but there's also so many good things. So if you hear something negative, if you're scared of whatever you're scared of, try to find a positive story to go along with it. Don't always let the negativity, go so deep, but to find one or two positive things that come out of it, or that, that you can turn to instead of all the negativity.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for sharing. If you could just give us an example of how your training in the military and your experiences in life, how they've helped you be a coach and a mother and an athlete.
So I think, the values that you learn from the military, obviously teamwork, you learn integrity, you learn dedication, you learn being on time. Those things carry over into all aspects of your life, especially as an athlete. As in the military, you wear a uniform and you dedicate yourself to your country. You're giving back to something greater than yourself. So that carries over into being an athlete, wanting to dedicate myself to being the best that I can be. To being the same to being a mother as well, wanting to instill in my children the values that I learned in the military. I think the military truly sets you up to be the best that you can be. That's not just the tagline. It's truth. It's like real life. So I really do look back at my days in the military and think of everything I've learned and just how much better of a person as a mother that it's truly made me.
Hi, I'm a parent of a child with a disability. Can you share what you think your parents did right and maybe even some things you wish they hadn't done as you were going through this journey?
Yeah, so I acquired, obviously I lost my leg when I was 24, so I was, out of the house kind of on my own, but we work with a lot of parents who do have young children with disabilities, and I think you never tell them that they can't do anything, because even if they try it, maybe they can't, maybe they fail at it, maybe they try it and they don't like it, but I would always urge parents to tell their children with disabilities to try. Never tell them that they can't do anything. Never discredit them until they actually give it a try. And I think a lot of times you only realize what they're capable of, but they're good at it, and they find a new passion, and then that becomes kind of their world. So we don't give ourselves enough credit that we're able to do. So just believing in your children and just letting them try, letting them fail. It's okay. They'll learn from it, and they'll go to the next thing.
Hey, Melissa, thank you very much for a great talk. When you were talking about getting off the plane and stuff, the road march north, it's a very, for me anyways, it's kind of like, makes you rethink and, reimagine those events. So it was actually, for me, a little bit emotional. As you went through this, you've kind of mentioned how you're now running your program in Chicago to help younger people deal with their disabilities. Did you have any mentors along the way that helped you through your injury and helped pave a way for you, or did you kind of have to sort of find your way on your own? And if you did have a mentor, could you kind of talk about that relationship?
Sure, yeah. First off, thank you for your service as well. No, I 100% had mentors. So I was fortunate to do my rehab and recovery at Walter Reed. So everyone, the camaraderie in the military is tight to start with, but you get to Walter Reed and you're surrounded by other soldiers who have gone through these, events that you never expect, and suddenly you're missing a limb, you're missing your eyesight, you're missing 3 limbs, and you're all trying to find, your new normal. You're trying to get through that and figure out your new life. So when I got to Walter Reed, I looked towards others, and I say it's a good place to be because you're surrounded by it. You're not isolated by yourself, trying to manage how to live life day to day with one leg. But I had dozens of others to look to. And I saw, there was a gentleman who had lost his leg a month before I did. And he was up and walking. So in my mind, I could say, okay, in a month, I'm going to get there. So you truly use each other to move forward for that inspiration. And being a female, I was the first female. It didn't even cross my mind until months later. But it was finding another woman who had a similar injury and kind of being able to talk with her and, can I wear high heels? What about the toenail polish? Like trying to find those little things, these questions that you weren't sure who to ask. So I can't say enough about the importance of having a mentor, of having somebody who has gone through something similar, talking with them about it, and just being there for each other. That's not just in the military. That's not just being injured. That's any time in life, just having that mentor, that person that you can truly lean on, that helps you out in tough times, can laugh with you, can cry with you, and just truly wants you to be the best that you can be.
Did you feel a certain amount of pressure because you were the first to set a standard for others coming behind you?
No, so he asked, did I feel pressure because I was the first female? Honestly, I didn't even know I was the first female until someone told me like months later. Because in my mind at the hospital, we all wore the same uniform. I didn't even look around and say, oh, there's no other girls here. Like it didn't even cross my mind. So I think that's kind of the Army way, at least for me it was. We wore the same uniform, we were all there together, and eventually someone's like, oh, you were the first girl. I was like, oh, okay. It's not, obviously, never something I'd planned on doing, but, if my journey from then on helps somebody else, that's just kind of the cherry on top. All right, if you're thinking, I'm going to show you one really cool thing, just because number 1, I like to show off my medal, but number 2, it's like really cool. So it's a Paralympic medal, obviously, so not an Olympic medal, But, so obviously in the Paralympics, you have amputations, you have spinal cord injuries, you have visual impairment. So if I had a visual impairment, if I could not see this medal and what color it was, two things. First, it's got Braille. So I could read that it says the 2016 Paralympic Games, but also, take a listen. Gold, silver, and bronze each have beads in the medal. They have a different number of beads, so they make a different sound. So if I was on that podium and I couldn't see and they handed me a medal, I could shake it and I could know that it was a bronze medal. So I'm a little biased, but even cooler than the Olympic medals.
Okay, any last questions? Okay. Well, we
Thank
invite
you for
out to
having me. And
to the
again,
reception
from
area.
one veteran to the next. Happy veterans.